I will now turn our program over to our moderator for today's Issues and Eggs program, Bruce Dusenberry. Bruce graduated from UCLA School of Law, and he practiced law for 17 years here in Tucson. He changed careers to run the family business, Horizon Moving Systems. In 2013, the Tucson operation of the company was sold to Sudeth Relocation Systems. Bruce continues operations for Horizon Moving Systems in Sierra Vista and Yuma. Bruce is no stranger to most of you because he is very active in our community. Bruce?
Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. We're so glad you're here this morning. This is the second annual League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson breakfast, and we hope to be doing these Issues and Eggs breakfasts for many years to come. Last year was a great success, and we learned a lot about the importance of jobs in our community and economic development. It was a great breakfast, and I'm sure today will be just as good, if not better. We have a very distinguished panel who are knowledgeable in the subject area of Common Core and Arizona's college and career ready standards. So I'm sure we'll learn a lot. We're all here this morning to take a deep dive into a subject that has become somewhat of a lightning rod and controversial in our state. In an effort to achieve balance, the League did reach out to extend an invitation to State School Superintendent Diane Douglas. Unfortunately, she was unable to join us, and the efforts to secure another person who might be critical of those standards or have concerns about them was also unsuccessful. But there are many legitimate questions and concerns that parents, teachers, and policymakers have about Common Core, and that's really the reason that we're having this breakfast this morning. We hope to directly address as much as possible all of those concerns that we can, and talk about the good things and areas that may need that we all need to look at. So a lot of that will probably, we hope, happen in the Q&A session after our speakers give their remarks, and they're looking forward to addressing those things. So I'd just like to not take too much thunder away from all of these great speakers, but start with the principle that we can all embrace, and that's at the center of what we're going to be talking about this morning, and really the mission of education, and that's student success. Two very simple words: student success. That's really the Common Core's purpose, and it's to further that goal. So very happy to first introduce, we're not going to be going quite in the order that's in your program, but I'm guessing you can follow along. We're going to start, though, with the first person in your program, and if you haven't already looked at the resumes, the short biographies of these speakers, I would really urge you to do so, because I'm not going to read those. They're one measure of distinguish is just to see how long and all the accomplishments that these people have, and I know that what you have in your program is just a short example of some of the things that they've done in their careers. But Dr. McCallum is is a good example of that. He's got no shortage of things that we could discuss. But let me just briefly highlight that he is a professor of mathematics at the University of Arizona. He received his PhD in mathematics from a little school called Harvard University, and then spent time at Cal Berkeley, and came to join the faculty of the University of Arizona in 1987. In 2006, he formed the Institute for Mathematics and Education at the U of A, and is currently its director. And in 2009-2010, he was a lead writer for the Common Core States Standards in Mathematics. So Dr. McCallum helped to create the standards that we're going to be discussing today. He will explain to us how they were developed and how they are relevant in establishing educational outcomes. And before I forget, and sorry to do this right in the middle of your introduction, but there are cards on the table. So as the speakers are talking and you come up with questions that you'd like for them to address, please use those cards, because when the Q&A session starts, we'll collect those and bring them up and have those questions answered for you. So, without further ado, please welcome Dr. William McCallum.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and also for not making it too long. I'd like to spend a bit of time just giving you the background of the standards and also the design principles that informed them, that we chose to try and produce common standards for this country that would be college and career ready. Maybe I'll give you a little bit of my background in education first. It's true that I've had a research career in mathematics at the University of Arizona for most of my life. I've also been involved in education, starting with undergraduate education and looking at the calculus curriculum in the 90s. And then in the OOs, I was involved in a lot of efforts in K-12 education on advisory boards. And in particular, there was an earlier effort at getting states to align their standards by an organization called Achieve, which had something called the American Diploma Project Network. And that was an effort to get states to start looking at their standards together. One of the problems we had in this country is you had 50 different sets of state standards, very variable. Fractions used to be, my favorite example is what grade level you learn addition of fractions, everybody's favorite topic. And in state standards before the Common Core, the grade levels varied from grade 1 to grade 7. And so there is a lot of incentive to get states to align their standards, and I was involved with that American Diploma Project Network. And I think it was because of my experience in both the mathematics research community and in the mathematics education community, and my ability to sort of straddle those two communities and help them come and work together, that I was invited to chair the work team for writing the Common Core state standards in fall of 2009. That was a momentous year. When I was invited to do that, I thought, well, yes, one more time, I'll try and do something, and it probably won't go anywhere. And we put a lot of effort in that year to really trying to get lots of different communities together. We had a work team of about 50 people who were from mathematicians, teachers, mathematics education researchers, State Department of Education personnel, people from all over the country. And then we also had a review team and an advisory, a validation committee. And we started the work of writing standards in the fall of 2009, and it was an extremely intense process that involved lots of feedback and lots of input. We sent out about 3 rounds of drafts of the standards to the member states of the initiative. And I want to emphasize that point. This was a state-led initiative. It was something that came out of 2 organizations whose members are states, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. They got together and said, this is crazy that we have all of these different standards. It would be advantageous to us in our own operations to have some alignment between states. There were 48 states who signed on to that initiative, and that's the group of states that we sent these drafts out to. I remember Mary Canuck from the Arizona, who at that time worked for the Arizona State Department of Education, was on the work team, and she organized during that year these weekends when teachers came in from all over the state and sat down with the standards and pored over them and then sent us back commentary. And imagine that process happening 48 times. We also went, I remember another memorable weekend in DC where the American Federation of Teachers pulled together teachers from all over the country. And myself and Jason Zimber, one of the other 3 lead writers, sat and got an earful of that draft and made many changes in the standards as a result. There was also, as I say, a feedback group. National organizations commented on the standards. In March of 2010, we put up a public draft for the standards for public comment and received 10,000 comments. And we looked at all of them. Well, not quite all of them. Some of them were not really actionable items. Some of them were things like get the federal government out of the standards. Well, since it was already not involved, there wasn't much to do about that. But items that people who commented on actually the mathematics, we looked at those comments and in the end did everything we could to consider carefully the comments that people made, taking into account the fact that different people sometimes make opposite comments on the same thing, so you can't please everybody. In addition to the feedback, we looked carefully at the evidence. We were charged to write standards that, if they were followed, would produce students who were ready for college and ready for career by the time they graduated from high school. And there were lots of sources of evidence that we could look to for that. There was a national report by the National Math Panel, which was constituted under President Bush, which issued a very important report on the state of mathematics education in this country. There's some important documents from the National Research Council on early childhood learning that had synthesized the research on early childhood learning and made recommendations on what students should be learning in early grades. We also looked at international standards, particularly standards of high-achieving countries like Hong Kong, Korea, and Singapore. And there was a nice report that synthesized the standards of those three countries and made recommendations on how the US should align with those. We looked carefully at those reports and also the standards themselves of those countries. We also looked at standards of high-achieving states, or states that had high standards in the United States, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Indiana, and we tried very carefully to sort of look at all that was out there and then go one step further and produce somehow the next generation of standards. So let me talk a little bit about the shifts in the standards and how these standards represent some evolution beyond the state of state standards in 2009. And I think the three important principles that we focused on were focus, coherence, and rigor. So focus means in each grade level doing the math that's important in that grade level so you can move on and do the next piece of math in the next grade level. It means focusing on what's important so you don't keep doing the same thing over and over again and cycling back to each grade level to learn the same things you were supposed to learn the previous grade level. Focus means narrowing down what you do. It means leaving out your favorite pet topics. You'll get to them later because you'll be ready for them. In particular, the focus in grades K through 5 in the standards is very strongly on arithmetic. And so in that sense, the standards represent a return to that sort of focus. Arithmetic as a preparation for algebra is very important. The focus in middle school is very much on ratios and proportional relationships. So the focus was an effort to try and get away from what was called the mile wide and steep curriculum that we had. Principle of coherence simply meant making math make sense. We tried to make a set of standards which told a story about mathematics over grade levels so that teachers at each grade level would know why they were teaching what they were teaching and what they were preparing students for in the next grade level. And by rigor, we meant a balance between procedural fluency, being able to do the math. The standards require students to memorize their addition tables and their times tables. They're supposed to know how to do arithmetic by hand using the standard algorithms. There are fluency requirements in the standards, but that is balanced by a requirement for conceptual understanding. We want students to know why they're doing what they're doing and not see mathematics as a bunch of meaningless procedures. And then applications. Students should actually have a knowledge of how mathematics is used and should leave school with the ability to use mathematics. So those are the three fundamental principles on which we base things. I think that maybe at that point, let me just say one more thing about college and career readiness and how we thought about that. College readiness really means, in this country, getting to algebra. And one of the big barriers for students is they hit a wall when they hit algebra. So we designed these standards very carefully to build a ramp to algebra, starting in kindergarten, and we'll hear from our kindergarten teacher later about that, maybe. And we thought it was really important to make sure that algebra was introduced and algebraic thinking, even when you're just doing arithmetic, was introduced early. So these students start working with equations and expressions in grade 6. They do a substantial amount of what used to be in a typical Algebra 1 course in grade 8. People have worried that the standards do not actually allow students to accelerate, but in fact, the standards are built so that students can accelerate. Students who come into high school will be prepared for more rigorous courses because of that ramp to algebra that's been built in grades K through 8. The grades K through 8 standards have been examined by a renowned researcher in international comparisons, and he found them to be very closely aligned to the standards of high-achieving countries, more closely aligned than any previous set of state standards. So I think I'll leave it there. I just want to maybe end on a personal note. I have 3 daughters. All of them went to the University of Arizona. All of them went through public schools in Tucson. One of them lives in North Carolina now. The other 2 still live here in Tucson, although who knows where they will be in 5 years. I wrote these standards for my grandchildren. It's time for this country to have a set of standards that fulfill a promise to our children, that we will provide them with a rigorous and sound education, and that they won't have to be worrying about what happens when they move schools, that they will have coherence and rigor in their education. Thank you.
If I may, Bill, one thing that you said that I wrote down when we were preparing for today was that these are not a one-size-fits-all standard. They are where we want to end up. They're the goal, the end state. But the journey to get there, these are your words, I believe, are individualized, and the curriculum is up to each district school and each teacher. So that's an important concept that you made that I thought everyone should know. So thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate that. And as you can see, and as you will continue to see, this panel is very knowledgeable in the concept of having clear and common standards in our educational institutions. So the next speaker is Brittany Betterton. She has taught kindergarten for 8 years in the Sunnyside Unified School District, and she earned her BA in elementary education from the University of Arizona and her MA in early childhood education from Northern Arizona University, our fine state institutions. She is nationally board certified teacher in literacy and was named a 2015 Rodell exemplary teacher. Ms. Betterton has also helped create the units for math and English language arts for the district, Sunnyside District, which are based on Arizona's college and career ready standards. So a distinguished teacher in our community, as really all of our teachers are so important, and we know that Tucson values teachers. She will describe for us how the Common Core standards are being applied in the classroom, including the development of the curriculum based on those standards. So please welcome Brittany Betterton.
Thank you. So like he said, I'm going to talk about how the standards are being taught in the classrooms. I come from an early childhood background, so that's what I'll really touch upon as I'm speaking about these standards. So when I first started teaching, we did not have Common Core standards. It was the previous Arizona standards. And then in 2011, I remember the summer they kind of rolled out. I looked at them and I was shocked to see what kindergartners were going to be expected to do. When I taught before, they just had to know 2 + 2 is 4. Okay? Now you want them to solve word problems, explain how they solved the word problem, what strategies they used. In reading, they just had to tell me characters before. Now they're having to compare and contrast those characters. I was a little shocked, like most people were. But like he said, in my district, I was given the opportunity to kind of dissect those standards with other teachers in my grade level. And then we were able to create units based on the English language arts and also mathematics based on those standards. So we gave them activities they could do with it, explanations of what those standards really meant to use as a tool. But what I really like about Common Core is their goals and their expectations. They're not saying you have to teach this in this order. Each district is kind of given the chance to make little plans like we did to see how the teachers want to teach those. So it gives teachers kind of the flexibility to take those standards and you're expected to teach them, but how you teach them is up to you, what's best for your students within those. So we have some flexibility with the Common Core standards. Let's see. Sorry, I've never done this before, so I'm kind of nervous. So in our district, we rolled them out very slowly. So first K1 had it for a year, and then second grade, and then third through fifth, and so on and so forth. So it really gave the district the chance to dive deep into those, see what kind of worked, what didn't work, how we could change it. And we still continue to do that to this day. Every summer, the teachers get together and kind of see what worked with those plans and what didn't, maybe how we can shift standards around for different curriculum mapping. So it's something we're continually building on. And Bill kind of touched on this as well. A great aspect of the Common Core standards is that every year skills are built upon. So something I teach in kindergarten, I can look and see what that will look like in third grade and fifth grade and high school. It's not something we just teach in kindergarten and it goes away. Okay, it's continually built upon throughout the years. Also, teachers are continually learning from this. And what I have found is that the age of social media and the internet is amazing for these new national type standards. I've been able to reach out to teachers in other states and see what they're doing. They're able to ask me, but we have these common standards where we can kind of learn from each other. So the collaboration across states is amazing, what we can learn from each other. We're not just in our little bubble anymore. Okay. For parents, I know that was a big thing. The parents, they're used to what they did when they went to school. So this was a huge shift for them. So it's really important that parents were educated. I have the opportunity as a kindergarten teacher to really get them from the very beginning. So in the fall when I do parent-teacher conferences, it's almost all about the Common Core, trying to get them to understand these new standards. I know other teachers actually hold like classes for parents after school to kind of teach them the new ways of these standards, especially math, because there's some different ways of teaching math that parents are a little scared because they're not sure how to help them. Okay? But teachers are, I know there's teachers all over who are having these meetings with parents and almost little after school tutoring for parents to get them to learn about those standards. I can't talk a lot about testing because in kindergarten I don't deal with the standardized testing. But testing is not something that changed when we got Common Core. It's something teachers continually do. Every day I'm testing the kids. Little informal assessments, then weekly and monthly more formal paper pencil type assessments, getting them to explain their thinking to me. So testing really didn't change. We still need to do it for the kids. It's important that we know that what we're doing is working. So those little constant assessments I do let me know, oh, maybe tomorrow I need to go back and reteach that a different way because that really didn't work today. So let's see. So what I've realized in teaching with Common Core in the past 4 years is that it's amazing where you can push kids. I never would have thought when I first saw these standards that my kids in kindergarten could be successful with word problems. Like that's not something I thought you taught in kindergarten, and it's amazing what they can do when you allow them to. We do weekly word problems where they work in a group and they have to explain their thinking to a partner and try to solve it in multiple ways. Okay. This is kind of a side note. It kind of goes with what Bill said about having common national standards. I grew up in a military family, so I moved at least 5 times, 5 different states, and every time I moved, I was either playing a game of catch up, because I was behind and I hadn't been taught that before, or I was so far ahead I was bored. So I would have, as a student, loved to have had these nationally common standards as I moved from state to state, just to help me with the transition. And I'm sure that's something that other people would agree with, that we need something where as students transfer from state to state, military or otherwise, they're able to just jump right in and not be behind or bored. Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Let's give her a hand for being a 2015 Rodell exemplary. Pretty amazing. Thank you, Brittany, for that practical discussion of how the standards are actually used in our schools. The next speaker is someone who I'm fairly familiar with. His name is Mike Varney, and he became the president and CEO of the Tucson Metro Chamber in 2011. At the same time, I was the chair-elect of the Tucson Metro Chamber. So as Mike arrived, I arrived as the new leader on the board, and together we faced some initial challenges, and really it was a major change in the chamber that took place under Mike's leadership, and it was great to be a part of that. Education was and is more than ever one of the primary focuses of the Tucson Metro Chamber, and the Chamber is very involved in making sure that we have educational success, not just in Tucson, but really throughout the state. He is not just a leader of our Tucson Chamber, but he currently chairs the board of directors of the Western Association of Chamber Executives and is on the board of the Arizona Chamber Executives and on the American Chamber of Commerce Executives Board. So he also is involved in many civic organizations throughout Tucson, and as I said, great champion of education. Mike's going to speak to us about the business perspective, but of course the business perspective is really the health and welfare of our community. As business and jobs are created, as we talked about in the first annual breakfast of League of Women Voters, so is the quality of living, and our quality of life and our future is based on that, and the business community gets that. Mike's going to talk about why the Common Core standards are important.
Thank you, Bruce, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to open by making sure that everybody knows that this breakfast this morning, this very important breakfast this morning, came together largely not just on the shoulders of the League, but two people in particular, Carol West and Roxanne Housley, worked diligently on this. We have been working together with both of them for about 3 months now. So as Bruce said, my role here is to talk about the end result of education. And I stand before you today representing 1,500 businesses and about 180,000 employees that those businesses have. I'm going to probably bring more of a practical, real-world side of education and the theoretics of Common Core to you this morning. At the Chamber, we believe there are two aspects to education. One is every community has a moral obligation to educate its young people. The second interest that we have at the Chamber is economic. We look at education as what happens from the time a child is born to the time that they are able to contribute to our economy and contribute to their own household income and to the community. And it's the pathway that they take through education that enables them to do the things that all communities look for, which is to grow businesses and to have a quality of life in their community. Little known fact, and I'm going to jump around here a little bit, so if this seems a little scattered, it's on purpose. Little known fact that 70 to 90% of the new jobs that we will have in our community here 10 years from today will come from the companies that are already here. Those companies will grow and expand and hire way more people than any outside company coming to our area will bring with them. Those companies obviously cannot expand and they cannot grow if they cannot find workers, and we've got that problem today right here in Tucson, and frankly communities across the country have that same problem, that they can't grow because they can't find people to fill their positions. First area I want to talk to you a little bit about is to give you some perspective on some things that I think you'll find important. I look around this room today and I see a lot of baby boomers. I'm a baby boomer. If you've got gray hair, you're probably a baby boomer. We were a large generation population-wise. One thing we were so busy doing because we were competing, there were more of us than there were available positions when we left school. So we worked very, very hard, like in that game of musical chairs, to go get that position. And if we sat on a chair and the company said, well, welcome to the company, in 5 years we're going to move you to Dallas, in 5 years we're going to move you to London, England, you went and you saluted because there were more of us than there were available positions. And because we worked so hard, kept our noses to the grindstone, we produced less than 2 children per couple. So demographically, there are fewer people in the generations that trail the baby boomer generation. Baby boomers are retiring at a pace of 10,000 a day. There's 72 million of us. 10,000 baby boomers a day leave the workforce for some reason. So you look at the trailing generations that are going to be called upon to come up behind the boomers who are leaving the workforce with all of that experience and with all of that institutional knowledge and those leadership skills and so forth. And if those trailing generations don't have those same high levels of skills, how can we expect our companies to perform at the level that they do now? So there is a demographic side to this. There's a wonderful book written by a gentleman, economic development expert called whose name is Mark Lautman. The name of the book is When the Boomers Bail, and he talks about what he calls the looming catastrophic full employment, where communities will be locked in a fight to the death to acquire qualified workers to keep their existing companies alive. And he doesn't paint a very solid a picture of success for all communities. Again, it will be like a game of musical chairs. Some communities will be able to attract those and grow their own qualified workers, and others will not. The communities that do not attract or grow their own qualified workers will slide gradually into a state of decay, or so is his prediction. One other statistic I'm going to throw at you, and I don't know if any of the other speakers were going to comment on this, but the U.S., which we've typically thought of as being the leader in a lot of things in the world, is now 14th in education attainment and 26th in math attainment. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't see us maintaining our economic leadership and our political leadership in the world if we have an education system that is ranked 14th. So as you've heard from the prior speakers, Common Core, in our view, is just a way to make sure that our kids are taught at a level where they can compete on a world stage. They need to compete not just with the community next door, but they need to compete with communities around the country. I'm going to shift into the second area that I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm going to give you some examples, and these are examples that have come to me from local businesses. I met about a year and a half ago with a company that leases meter readers and other people to companies like gas companies, electric companies, and any companies where there are hundreds or thousands of meters that need to be read and so forth. And I asked the guy, I said, what's your biggest challenge in business right now? And he said, workforce. I said, oh, well, tell me a little bit about that. And he said, well, our workers need a basic understanding of English because they need to read instructions and then apply what they read. And they need a basic understanding of math because they have to do basic calculations. And so we put them through 4 tests: proficiency in basic math, basic English, a drug test, and a background check. For every 100 employees that apply for the positions at our company, 5 come out the bottom. 5. So 95% are filtered out in one of those 4 areas. The National Association of Manufacturers today has 60,000 unfilled technical jobs on its website. Can't find welders, can't find lathe operators. Ventana Medical Systems, when I talked to Mara Espinal recently, or before she left, Mara said that the number one challenge to Ventana was workforce. Couldn't find the highly skilled, highly educated people they needed to keep Ventana moving forward. The other end of the scale, I had breakfast recently with a company that's a moving and storage company. Number one problem, workforce. And I said, well, you know, how can workforce be a problem for a company where all you need is a really strong back? And the owner of this company looked at me and said, well, those strong backs have to show up for work. The recent job fair last week, employers went to that job fair and there were 1,100 unfilled jobs that they are begging the community to take. Question is, does our unemployed or underemployed population have the skills to fill those jobs? Now I'm going to shift, I'm going to get a little political. Common Core is a term you've heard here this morning and probably before. You've also probably heard, and if you haven't heard, you will hear the term Arizona College and Career Ready Standards. Politically, there were some people who wanted to make the term Common Core a toxic term. That if you heard Common Core, you were supposed to automatically have a knee-jerk reflex that says you were against it. And that toxicity was sold, in my view, largely on the back of the fact that it was a federal education program, and that the feds were going to come into Tucson, Phoenix, and all of Arizona, and they were going to tell local school districts how to teach. And as you heard from Bill, that's just simply not true. These are the standards. These are the Common Core is the bar. It's not how you jump over the bar. That's still left up to local school districts. So Arizona created what they call College and Career Ready Standards, which is just another name for Common Core in the state of Arizona. And so I just want you to know that when you hear those two terms, they're one and the same. I like Common Core because it's shorter and it's the same problem or same program. I'm going to read to you, just so you know that Mike isn't bringing just his own opinions to the podium this morning. I want to read to you from some other experts who I think you will agree have a high degree of credibility. The ASU's Morrison Institute for Public Policy and the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications recently did a poll in the state of Arizona. One of the things they found out is that education should be a top priority in the state of Arizona. Kind of a no-brainer, but at least they put some numbers to it. In the summary of that survey, they wrote, in regard to state funding, nearly 8 in 10 Arizona adults believe Arizona spends too little on K-12 education, with nearly 2/3 willing to put additional money into K-12 education, according to the poll. While the vast majority of Arizonans are concerned about the state's kindergarten through 12th grade education system and believe further investment and improvements are critical, Arizona consistently hovers near the bottom of all 50 states in academic quality, achievement, and per pupil spending. They went on to say about the key findings about Common Core. Half of the respondents were asked in this survey, were asked the following question: do you favor or oppose the Common Core curriculum for Arizona public schools? That was half of the respondents. Do you favor Common Core? The other half was asked, do you favor or oppose establishing a standard set of education concepts to be taught in public schools across the country, including Arizona, and then testing students on these concepts to assure that students receive a rigorous education and providing a system that allows outcomes to be compared from state to state and school to school. So 50% were asked, do you believe in high standards? 50% were asked, do you believe in, or do you favor Common Core? The findings are indicative of the political fringe related to the Common Core. 55% of those asked whether they favor or oppose Common Core said they oppose it as a curriculum for Arizona public schools. It's not a curriculum, standard. However, when the basic elements of Common Core are described to respondents without giving them the term Common Core, nearly 7 out of 10 favor it. So the term has been made toxic through political channels. So there's one, I hope, credible source that I can bring to the podium. I also want to bring an editorial that was printed recently here in the Arizona Daily Star. And the headline is, Republican Makes the Case for Common Core. And it was an editorial by James Kelly. I am a 4th generation Tucsonan conservative Republican and Navy veteran who is active in my legislative and school districts and a supporter of Common Core standards for K-12 education. I support public education with a commitment to the idea that a literate, self-sufficient citizenry is the best guarantee of liberty. Common Core, known in Arizona as the College and Career Ready Standards. In the U.S., a doctor, lawyer, architect, or real estate agent has the standards of competency created from best practices with flexibility for changes in technology and new information. The Common Core standards don't direct the curriculum or the teaching method. A doctor in Arizona is just as qualified as a doctor from New Jersey. Some schools of medicine may be more prestigious and have more specialized focus, but each graduate has exhibited some common standards measured in a common way. Since economic and technological expansion of the late 50s through today, the mobility of the American family created a need for common competency and assessment. You just heard the prior speaker, Brittany, speak about that. There are many myths regarding Common Core that one may find on social media sites. Most of the anti-Common Core names are related by a super PAC, Freedom Works, solely designed to wield a sledgehammer against candidates they perceive to be soft in their conservative principles regarding education. The rhetoric consists of fabrications based on the facts of the implementation of the standards, and there is more in here, but there's the voice of, and it's self-admittedly conservative Republican, but somebody who's really tuned into the core standards. And then the final thing I want to read to you comes from the business community. A gentleman by the name of Craig Barrett is a well-known Arizona business executive. It seems Common Core state standards detractors follow Lenin's maxim that a lie told too often becomes the truth. Their most recent foray into trying to take down the effort, spearheaded by the nation's governors and chief state school officers, to outline what all students need to know what they need to be able to do in reading and math, leaves us with no choice but to roll up our sleeves and yet again set the record straight. As a former engineering professor, the former chairman and chief executive officer of Intel, and current CEO of one of the highest performing charter school systems in the country, BASIS, I can speak directly to why businesses and indeed higher education benefits from Common Core and why concerns about the math standards rigor are misplaced. First, the Common Core state standards are more rigorous than most states' old standards, and the notion that they restrict or limit student learning is a willful misread of them. In fact, the standards ensure that all students master the math skills needed for success to progress systematically from one concept to the next, to develop the tenacity to solve problems and to understand the logic of math. And there is more that this very well highly respected executive has written too. So there's the business side of Common Core. I hope that made great sense to you. It certainly makes great sense to us at the Tucson Metro Chamber. And if you're not tuned into all of the things that we're doing to try to make Common Core and state funding for education, put it in a better place than it's in today, then tune into our website and track what we're doing. Thanks a lot.
You ever have to wonder where Mike stands on our final speaker, save the best for last here, is our superintendent of the Tucson Unified School District, Dr. H.T. Sánchez. Dr. Sánchez, your bio doesn't say this, but comes from West Texas family in the oil business. And he derived a lot of common sense from his dad and his family in West Texas. And went to school at, Angelo State University. I don't know where that is in Texas, but got his Bachelor of Arts from Angelo State, got his Master of Education at Sul Ross State University, and this one I do know, got his doctorate in education from Texas A&M University. He's a very accomplished gentleman, 17 years, you look way too young. I like to bring this up every time I do an introduction to you. 17 years in public education as a principal in elementary schools, middle schools, and high school principal. So great experience, and Dr. Sánchez is going to discuss with us the implementation of standards and the use of standards to evaluate students and teachers, and ultimately to evaluate schools and districts by determining if the graduates have knowledge and skills necessary to be successful in a 21st century global economy. Please welcome Dr. Sánchez.
one of the interesting pieces, one of the interesting side notes about the whole Common Core conversation is a highly political nature of Common Core. So what I'm waiting for is heart surgery. When's that going to become political? And let's just throw out the heart surgery standards. I don't think we need heart surgery standards. It's an art form. We should be able to do it our own way. And each hospital should have the discretion to be able to perform heart surgery how they want, because they know best and they know their people. And you know, maybe we'll tie it this way this time. Maybe we'll do it this way that time. Maybe we'll put them under this time. Maybe we won't next time. Who knows? Let's try it. Let's see how it works out. So I'm waiting for heart surgery to become political too. And so I think a lot of the misunderstanding with Common Core really comes around what Mr. Varney has discussed. There's a lot of politics tied to this. And so I think we have very sophisticated people in the political world that do very sophisticated polling and kind of figure out what really gets our blood boiling. And so, you know, anytime you say Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, it gets the blood up. Anytime you say Common Core, it gets the blood up. And so there's been a lot of sophistication behind understanding these terms that in American politics just get your blood boiling. I remember the one growing up for me was communism. That really got the blood boiling. You'd say communism and people, anything you tied to communism, it was just bad. And so, you know, Common Core and communism, I mean, some people tie that together. It's crazy. It makes me want to go back to my elementary days and get under the desk and put my hands over the back of my head, because I know that bomb that the Russians are going to drop is going to have no effect, because the laminate on the top of that desk is going to really protect me. So believing that being devoid of educational standards is going to protect us from some kind of evil at the national level is akin to believing that hiding under that desk in the 5th grade with my hands over the back of my head and the Russians dropping the bomb is going to protect me, and I'm going to be safe. And when, you know, the apocalypse is all hitting, I'm going to walk out and say, wow, okay. So anyway, so much for a sophisticated introduction. But you know, let's talk about what Common Core is and what it is not. You know, the conversation, and I've been keeping up with what's going on in the legislature, really is, it's simple. It's boiled down to two things. Do we want standards or do we want no standards? I mean, that's it. That's it. It's that simple. Do we want to have standards in Arizona by which we say you're prepared as a citizen to contribute? Or do we want no standards? And at that point, there's no assurance that anybody's prepared for anything. So it's that simple. So when you look at these bills circulate through the House and the Senate, it comes down to one question. Do we want standards? Because if you think about the way the pendulum swings in this conversation, at one point in the conversation, we felt that every school district should have its own discretion and it should build its own standards, and every classroom should have its own discretion and build its own standards. And then somebody said, you know what, this isn't working because we continue to slide internationally as a country that produces well-educated citizens and is a country that's really pushing freedom, economic development, prosperity, and justice. And so we said, well, let's all come up with a minimum that if you got this, you're good. You're good across the nation, and economically, a nation like ours will continue to lead. And so we went from no standards to standards. And it's funny how that pendulum goes back and forth. So why does the pendulum go back and forth? Implementation. So what's implementation? It's how we take something that is apolitical, like a complete sentence, a fraction, you know, the year the country was founded, things like this, and we make them political. We make them political in the implementation because sometimes people that do what I do don't do it as well as we need to. So you have standards, and you have a choice. Do you bring your teachers and your administrators, do you bring them in and you ask them to read the standards, understand the standards, and then let's line out a year. I'll just choose English. I was an English teacher despite the Texas accent. So kids needed speech therapy when they're done with me. Let's take English. So you have Common Core standards in English language arts. So the wrong way of doing it is you say, well, we have standards in English language arts by Common Core, so I'm going to go buy a curriculum. And then I'm going to make everybody do it. And if they don't, I'm going to document them. And when I document them, because they're not doing what I told them to do, I'm going to fire them. So that's one way. And it's not an exaggeration. And so when you think about all of the teachers that have risen up against it, they see this data of these documented visits where they're not doing Common Core, and it's not like they should be doing, and so now they're unemployed. And so you have that level of misinformation, and that's just not good practice in anything. When you get to that level of on Monday you do this, Tuesday you do this, Wednesday you do this, and if you don't, you didn't ask for permission, you're in trouble, that's not good teaching. That's not good practice in anything, really. Because you have to believe that the people you have in those positions are competent. You have to believe that their university study did them some good. Otherwise, why'd you hire them? So going back to the best way of doing things when it comes to Common Core on the implementation side is you really need to bring the people in who are doing the work. And so you have your English language arts standards, and so you bring in your freshman English teachers and you say, all right, English 1, what are we going to cover the first quarter? How do we translate these standards into action? How do we translate these standards into steps that teachers can take and read and understand, and then through their own design and art deliver to kids, and then assess the knowledge of students? I think Brittany did a good job in explaining that whole component. And so when you look at how Common Core is done well, you bring the people in to read the standards that are going to teach them. You ask them to lay it out quarter by quarter. We have 4 quarters, laid out quarter by quarter. What should be taught in the order at the appropriate level of depth. You ask them to contribute some ideas on the types of books and materials and resources that they might need, some of the websites that they could use, and you give it to them. And then they put it together, and then it's a curriculum, it's a novel concept, a curriculum of them, by them, for them, that actually works for our students and has their buy-in. And so when you look at districts that do things that way, you don't have all this anti-Common Core fervor. So I think a lot of the misunderstanding with Common Core comes to how did you put it in? Did you micromanage it? Was it top-down? Did you not ask people's opinion? Or did you ask them what they thought? Did you ask them for their opinion? Did you build it as such? And I take a look at our district, and you know, I have our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction, Steve Holmes, and he and the team have done an amazing job of bringing people together and asking, what do you think this means? What do you think this should look like? What resources should we leverage from each other? And so we haven't had protests against Common Core. We haven't had people just rising up saying this is bad and evil and horrible, because it's of them, by them, for our kids. When you take a look at the next piece, and I'll be brief on this because I know that there are a lot of great questions. A lot of times Common Core and the assessment get tied together, and they're two different things. We did spend in Arizona 3 years preparing for a different test than what the state ended up buying at the last minute. And we spent 3 years preparing for PARC, for this national assessment. The reason I understand that we went with the American Institute for Research, or AZ Merit, in buying it in 11 weeks, putting it in 10 weeks, was because AIR, American Institute for Research, they didn't take any federal money. So we threw away 3 years of hard work from school districts across Arizona and preparing for PARC, using their blueprint and building questions and really building ourselves up to this. That got thrown out because PARC took some federal grant money. And so I'll end by saying the absurdity of it all is when something that's as simple as do you want standards or do you not want standards turns into as highly controversial a topic as it is today. And all of the things that people don't like, don't want to do, think are bad, that they pitch underneath this tent. And so it's great that today's conversation is allowing us the opportunity to pull the pins out and throw the tent to the side to really see what's been punched under there and understand what's Common Core, what's political, and what's just misinformation. And so with that, I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you and look forward to the great questions and learning from the distinguished panel. Thank you so much.
lot of questions. So here's the time constraints we're under, audience and panel. It's approaching 10 after 9, and our cutoff is 9:30. So that gives us very little time. I'm going to pass the microphone to Bill here, and if you, Bill, will just pass it down the line. You all have questions that I think you're capable of answering, and that you're the appropriate person to answer. Prioritize them, and just read one question and answer it briefly, okay? And we'll see how many questions we can get through. Here you go, Bill.
I'm going to do two, because one's real easy. Someone wants to know where you can read the standards. You can read them at corestandards.org. Go there, download them, read them online. They've been available there for 5 years. The question I'd like to address is I'm hearing a lot from opponents that there is no evidence basis for Common Core and for the Common Core curriculum. If this is a misperception, what can be done to dispel that? Well, first, it's not a curriculum, it is a set of standards. Standards are an expectation for what students should know and be able to do at the end of each grade level. Curriculum is how you get there. Expectations are not demands. We all recognize some students will get there quickly, some slower, but the set of standards is simply that, a set of expectations. The evidence base, there's a large amount of evidence for it. I agree that the opponents claim there is none, and there's nothing I can do to dispel that claim, except to point to the evidence. And the website that I pointed you to, which has the standards, has a bibliography 2 or 3 pages long, which lists all of the reports, the international standards, the various source documents that we looked at. There is also this evidence base that I referred to by the researcher William Schmidt, who compared the standards to international standards. So, in particular, on the early childhood learning aspect, where a lot of people say that the standards are developmentally inappropriate in K through 2, there's a very distinguished panel of people by the National Research Council that put out a report that all early childhood learning experts on early childhood learning in mathematics specifically, and we followed that very closely, and we had early childhood learning experts on the work team. I think that's enough for me.
Okay, and you actually answered one of them, so I don't need to do that one. This one says, Common Core standards seem to be the answer to mobile kids, but in reality, how are they placed or taught at the correct level? For example, a 3rd grader that is at a 1st grade level. How is assessment used to inform instruction, and what kinds of assessments are used? Okay, so in my classroom I use lots of different assessments. We do informal assessments every day, observations, just me watching the kids as they're going through different activities. We also do more formal assessments where they are, for example, we just did one the other day where they had to model a word problem for me on a whiteboard and then explain to me how they solved it. And I use all of that data to place kids into different groups. So we have intervention groups for those kids who need the extra push. We have extension groups for kids who have already met that standard and need to be pushed to a little higher level. So that's how assessments are used in the early childhood classrooms.
I have a number of questions in front of me, and I hope I'm able, with the time that we have, to get to all of them, but I think we'll keep the rotation going here. So I'm going to answer this question. Someone wrote, given the influence of the corporate world in the political arena, why aren't education and the career and college and career ready standards being supported in Arizona? Is there any willingness in the business community to support any form of increased revenue to achieve this? Let me answer the first of those 2 questions first. The Arizona State Chamber is solidly behind the implementation of Common Core. There's another organization called the Arizona Chamber Executives, which is an association of people like me, chambers of commerce around the state. There are 40 individual Chamber of Commerce signatories supporting Common Core in the state of Arizona. If you want to go up the food chain a little bit, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is a solid supporter of Common Core, and of course they represent companies across the country. So there is a solid base of support in the business community at all levels for Common Core. that question actually dovetails into another question. Is there a downside to Common Core standards? If so, what is it? I think the downside is it's simply new, and like anything else that it's new, there's an implementation of an assessment system that needs to take place. Teachers need to maybe make some changes in the way that they teach. So it's new. That's my take on it, but I'm probably the least qualified of these four people to answer that question. And it says, if not, why are so many state representatives against the Common Core standards? We have a number of state senators and state representatives in the room, and I hope I can connect with at least one of you before we leave here today. Because I need to ask you a question about some steps we're going to take, and your input would be helpful. Why isn't there more support for it? It comes down to politics. I mean, you've heard what Common Core standards is. You know, it's a no-brainer, frankly. Do you want your kids, the kids that we educate, to perform so they can compete on a world stage and have a household income that allows them to raise a family and have choice in their life, or not? I mean, that's what it boils down to. So the standards themselves, I don't think, are the problem. I think the political influences on the term Common Core and everything that Common Core stands for are the problem. And so, generally speaking, I would say, just from my being around it, that the people who oppose Common Core see it as this federal takeover of local education, and it's anything but that. They may have other reasons, and I'm sure their reasons are, they believe very heavily in them. But the facts are the facts, and so I would say that if you can catch a state legislator and ask them that question, they can probably give you more detailed information on that. But I think it just comes down to political will, frankly.
The first question I have, and this is a great one, what impact have the Common Core standards had on skills of teachers and the quality of their teaching? Since Common Core is common, it encourages teachers to work together. And no offense to our higher education partners, but I've always found that our teachers learn more from each other than they do from a workshop. And so, when you have a group of teachers sitting and collaborating and sharing and discussing a singular issue, if you have 5 teachers talking about the best way to write a expository piece, then you have 5 options. You have 5 points of view. You have 5 potential solutions to a singular issue. So I think the Common Core, just because we have common standards, has raised that level of teacher skill because teachers are working together because there's a common focus. In terms of going back to our university partners, I think it's also helped inform them on some of the practices that they really need to focus on in preparing students to come out into a instructional or an educational environment that's a bit more predictive and less variable. And when you take a look at our local university and all of the districts around, and then how far-reaching U of A's graduates actually are in terms of their School of Ed, it really does help in informing what you do at the U of A that will have this pervasive effect. So I think it's been very, very productive. Another one, real quick one, how many times a year will students be tested using the upcoming Common Core standards? Once a year. There's about a week or so that students have a battery of tests. It leads into this next one, which is with standards, how do you evaluate when one can opt out of testing? Similar question, legislators may allow individual students to opt out of testing. What are the ramifications for these students who opt out? What about the effects that would have on the school district? I mean, that's a very complicated issue, but it comes back to, I think, one thing, is every day of the school year built for this test? And if so, that's a bad thing. If all we do is ramp up for this one test, we're not doing a good job. The test should just be another day. I think for many of us, we took the ACT, SAT to be where we were, and that was just another day. I mean, I don't think we got ourselves all wound up about it. And, we hear stories about little kids getting sick and everything before testing day. I think that's our fault. That's our fault as adults because we made every day of the year about that one test. We have to undo a lot of that. The ramifications aren't good if you're really looking at comparability. My personal opinion as a parent and an educator is the test should be part of a larger portfolio. It shouldn't be the be-all, end-all. but it should be part of a larger portfolio. And I think if we were to make the test part of a larger portfolio, we'd have that comparability piece, but we would also be able to gauge the whole student. And there's benefit in both sides of those, and I don't know why we haven't talked about that yet. Instead of opting out and getting rid of the thing, let's talk about making it part of a greater portfolio. I mean, in the business world, you have a portfolio. You don't invest in just one thing, and if you do, you're foolish. And we all know that that's not good practice in that area, so why would we invest in one thing when it comes to the assessment? Last ones are kind of tied together. How do you feel the cuts from K-12 budget will affect implementation of Common Core? It'll make it extremely difficult.
Okay, thank you. We have another round here.
So here's a question. If Common Core has so much flexibility, how do we know it won't wind up in the same balkanized state as before? And I think this is a really great opportunity for me to draw again this distinction between standards and curriculum. So I mentioned earlier on that previous to the Common Core, the grade level in which you were required to learn to add fractions with like denominators varied from grade 1 to grade 7 among the states. In Common Core, that happens in grade 4. So that standard remains, and as long as states, any states that have adopted the Common Core have agreed that they have an expectation that the children in their state will learn to add and subtract fractions with like denominators in grade 4. So in that sense, there's less flexibility, less balkanization than before. On the other hand, how you get there is up to you. There are many different philosophies out there about how to teach addition and subtraction of fractions. Some people think it should be done by rote memorization. Some people think it should be done by playing around with manipulatives. That's up to the individual choice of the school district or state. So that's the difference between curriculum, which is how you get there, and standards, which is the goal that you're expected. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity. If you have common standards, you can compare these different claims that people have about their preferred way of getting there, because you can judge them by the same standard, and over time, if you stick with those standards, you can start to learn what the really best practices are in teaching. Or you might find there's more than one.
How do kids reach Common Core standards in the same class when they have different capabilities? So this one kind of goes off the question I answered before. And this isn't something new, it's something teachers have always dealt with in their classroom. You don't get kids coming in at the same levels. I teach kindergarten, kids come in the first day, some can't hold a pencil, some can write a complete sentence. So that's something teachers have to work with. You do want all the kids to meet those same standards by the end of the year. So again, we're using those assessments, creating little groups, pushing those who need it, just using different strategies to meet the needs of each child's an individual, so meeting their needs in different ways.
I think I can hit a couple very quickly here. The first one is a pretty simple question. It says, do you think media, especially the print media, give fair, well-balanced reporting on education in the community? I don't know if there's a simple answer to that or not. I think it's in the eye of the beholder, frankly. I think our media pay close attention to education as well they should. I think what one person might see as being decent coverage, another person may not. I've always found the local media, all the media, to have education as a priority, so I guess it just depends on your interpretation. Related to that, since there is so much misunderstanding and negative dialogue about Common Core, why are there not more visible signs to educate everybody? I would like to have the very fine people over here at this table who are associated with an organization called Expect More Arizona to stand up, please, and be recognized. There's not an organization in the state that is doing more to push information about Common Core and about education, frankly, into our state than Expect More Arizona. So if you want to stay up to date on what's happening with Common Core and with education in general, be sure you become connected to Expect More Arizona. You can find them online. If you'd like to have a 4-minute video expression of what Common Core is all about, some of the details that weren't covered this morning, another website to go to is our website. It's TucsonChamber.org. Click on the Resource tab, and then click on Common Core. And there's a bunch of resources there. One of them is a nice little animated 4-minute video that talks about Common Core, and frankly, the political tone that you'll see in that video reflects what we at the Chamber and by extension the business community feels about Common Core.
This is an excellent question. With the current political climate, including Arizona's new leadership, is the future of the Arizona College and Career Ready standards in jeopardy? Barring the legislature doing anything that would basically outlaw standards, which isn't an impossibility. In my conversations that I've been very fortunate to have with the state superintendent, and I'll speak to that in particular, in speaking with her and her chief of staff, their focus is really, at this point, they're setting up a tour, so to speak, of Arizona, where they're going to show up, they're going to, come into Tucson, 4 or 5 venues, and they're going to ask people's opinion about what they feel needs to occur with the Common Core standards in Arizona. I think that's a very good move and a very wise move, because if the state superintendent does that, comes in and asks and gets the opinion of the people, I think there'll be a bit more balance. Of course, we'll have to do a good job in ensuring that there's a good representative group of people who are present. I mean, that's always very important, but I think that that's a good step. So again, I can only speak off of my experience and my conversations I've had with the state superintendent. I think that there's understanding that you can't just pull the rug out and leave a vacuum, that you build on that. But my concern is less so much with the state superintendent, more so with what's going to occur in the legislature.
Which is a great segue. See how carefully we've organized this to our call for action. One of the questions that I'm going to give to Roxanne Housley is, can the panel ask an elected legislator in the room about the status of the bill to repeal and replace Common Core? And there are a couple senators, I think, and representatives, but well, this bill has already passed the House, so I think it's past the representative stage. But I'm guessing that the call to action is going to involve something to do with our state legislature.
You are absolutely correct, Bruce. Well, first of all, you are here because you care about our Tucson community. You care about quality education for our children. And that, I believe, should be a top priority for us. You've already heard some great ideas. Thank you for the reference to some websites, Mike. In addition, when you leave here today, we are going to be handing out these sheets for you to take home. And I'll tell you about those in a second. The first call to action, though, is a big thank you to TUSD for videotaping this today. It will be on the League's website. So what you can do when you take your Citizens Directory with you, you can send a link to all of our state legislators, our senators, to school superintendents, to school boards. You can send this link to them and let them hear what has been shared with us today. We want you to continue to learn more about Common Core, and so we provided some additional information for you in the sheet you'll take home with you. Recently, I spoke to a principal of a Marana School District elementary school, and he has invited state legislators and his state senator to come to his school and to go into the classroom and talk to the teachers and see what they're learning. I mean, what a great way to help dispel some of these myths. And the third or fourth thing that we'd like you to do, and Judy, I know you mentioned that you got one new member today. I think I have a second one over kind of in that part of the room. But we'd love you to think about joining the League. These kinds of programs are something that we do not just on an annual basis. We have so many exciting things going on. And so we encourage you to think about joining the League and helping us move some of these initiatives and some of these concepts forward. So I'm going to turn it back over now to Judy.
The legislators want to
Oh, all right, super.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Senator Andrea D'Alessandro, Legislative District 2, which is part of Pima and all of Santa Cruz County. Unfortunately, on Thursday, the House voted to get rid of Common Core. On Thursday, it was assigned to the Senate Education Committee meeting. The next week in the legislature is very important because it is the last week to hear bills outside of the appropriation process. We can still hear appropriation bills after Friday, March 20th. I am confident, although I don't have a crystal ball, now that the governor has signed the budget, I believe that some representatives voted against Common Core because they had skin in the game until the governor signed the budget. Now that he signed it, with the support of the business community, I think the Senate has enough votes to keep Common Core. But it'll be Thursday. Now I can't speak for all the senators, but I know what they've done in the past, and I'm basing it on that. You can have your voices heard by signing on to azvoices.gov. You could also have your voice heard by the request to speak, which you can do now. And I'm a League of Women Voters member, so I'll send that to our leadership for everybody that's here to get it out. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that Senator D'Alessandro covered it, but there is also an opt-out bill that's going through the process as well, so please still continue to contact especially the Senate. A lot of things that have been negative towards Common Core and some of the education standards have gone through the House already, so it's really up to the Senate. So thank you again for being here, for reaching out, and continue to reach out to us. You can find information from us on Twitter, Facebook. I'm most active. Some of us send out newsletters, and we will have information like this about education as we go forward. So please join on that, and you can find out where things are in the process. And always reach out to us, ask us. We are your representatives, so use us.
Bruce wants me to be brief, and I'm a politician. Just teasing. Yeah, this bill will pass the Senate Education Committee. It will leave that committee. We have some members that have had the choice between having standards or having a teacher bring a gun to school. They said having a teacher bring a gun to school would be more important. There are people like that in the legislature. So this will get out of the Senate Education Committee, and we have to stop it on the floor. It's Senator Worsley, Senator Pierce, Senator Dial, and Senator Driggs, who are the four folks you have to contact to make sure that they stand firm. I'm pretty sure they will. I spoke to Senator Worsley yesterday about this, and he said, yeah, we have this. But some of the votes out of the House were pretty confusing, as was mentioned earlier. We were surprised that it actually escaped. But it's important that you stay engaged, and while we're in session, you're always in danger. So pay attention.
Thank you. So we're almost done. Just remember Worsley, Driggs, Dial, and Pierce, okay? Very important.
Well, I want to thank all of you for attending and supporting the League. I also want to thank our Development Committee. Carol West is the chair of the committee, and Roxanne Housley, Carol Shearer, Betsy Zukoski, and Bev Klain are on the committee, and they have put together this excellent presentation today, and I want to thank them very much. Don't forget to look at our website, lwvgt.org, in a week or so, and we'll have this presentation available on the web. And of course, I want to thank our panelists for being here today, and I hope you all have a good morning.